radio and everywhere, and the governor and commissioners have been here to talk about it. We want your input before we go down, give the public's idea of what they see is the best for Alaska. There's representatives from the governor's office here. Richard Feinberg, who's a, if you don't know him, he's a famous Fairbanks person, but he has been hired as one of the consultants for the governor. And his role is to, and I'll put it in my terms, throw rocks. We try and punch holes in it, give them some feedback on whether, what his impression is, and let them, it'll strengthen their process. So, certainly something that we didn't see in the Kawasaki administration. They decided what they wanted to do, it didn't matter what anybody else said. So we're going to go ahead. This is not the typical borough assembly meeting or legislative format. We're going to be very casual. We don't have a lot of answers to questions. That will happen in Juneau as they roll out all the consultants. And going through the Kawasaki experience, we know that the committees in the House will probably be a special committee on oil and gas, the resources that I sit on with Scott, and then finance. So it's going to be those three hearings before it gets to the floor. And when you go from one point, one committee to the next, the consultants come in and say, we ground different scenarios, and they've changed, and we didn't think of this. And there's a new calculation that will happen. And that will happen in all the committees from the start of each committee to the end, from one committee to the next. I can guarantee you that when we're getting ready to vote, there's going to be a new run, a new spreadsheet, and say, look, we got some different answers now. You know, it's time to vote. So that's kind of the world we're living in. But we're here to listen to you and to get your comments.
The representative said, you know, ACES, it's a big 46-page bill that we have. Many of you have probably seen parts of it and details. We're getting more and more details every day. They say writing legislation, making legislation is like making sausage, and it's just like that. So we're here today, as David said, to kind of hear from the public what input you can provide us as far as making a good bill. I gotta admit, it's a complex bill. A tax code like this takes years and years to write. There are some changes from the previous EPT bill that we're going to deal with now, and in my opinion, it's like adding more cogs to the wheel. We're really adding some extra layers of complexity into the process right now, and I fear that it's getting a little bit too complex. You know, I'm new here. I haven't had the benefit of being in the legislature following the issue that David Guttenberg has here for many years, but you know, it's a tough thing to learn. So keep my thinking cap on and listen to you folks today as we talk about the process. Thanks.
Well, they've covered pretty well. That's our reason for being here tonight, is to see just exactly how well you believe the information has been put out, how it's been explained, whether you understand it or not, how much more information people may need to actually feel comfortable with it. It is a very complex issue. Obviously, it's not something that you just go down there and say, yeah, that's what works in all cases, because they're looking at and don't have all the information themselves. The state's always been somewhat, at least in my mind, at a disadvantage without having the information that they necessarily need to evaluate what takes place at Prudhoe Bay, what takes place with the pipeline. Obviously, that's why we've had billions of dollars worth of lawsuits. We generally win. We're on the positive side of the collecting. Matter of fact, as I was told, it's about 10 to 1. For every dollar we spend, we collect about 10. So that leads you to somewhat believe that somebody is probably not operating with all the best intentions. But with that aside, it is a business, and they are operating as best they can for their stockholders, which probably people in this room own stock through either their mutual fund or just directly if you're a stock trader. And there's a lot of ways of owning their stock. So that is an interest to people also. They do put a lot of money into the state, but we're interested in making sure that the state receives its fair share. That was the governor's intentions. That's what she set out to do. And over the next 30 days at least, we'll look at that, We also, in my mind, have to be a little bit cautious of what we do, because we don't want to fall into that trap that the oil industry is already accusing the state of doing, and that is changing the tax code every year, even though it's only that's been changed twice in the last 30 years, I think. But the point is, when they're evaluated on a national basis or international basis, they take into consideration that, and that's where you hear those figures and numbers about where the state of Alaska stands as far as a oil-producing state, nation, however you want to look at us, in that case, related to its tax policy. So we want to be a little cautious that we don't fall into a trap, and it appears that that's exactly what we're doing, is what they're saying we're doing. But this, at least part of this bill, is simply a correction of some mistakes that were made, I believe, when the original PPT was passed. And obviously one of the larger ones was the corrosion control. So like David said, we're not here to preach to you folks and tell you what it should be and defend the governor's plan. At least I'm not here. I'm here to get your input, see how well you understand it, and what concerns you may have on either side of the question. So with that,
We'll open it up for general comments. If anybody has something written or Frank.
Yeah, can I sit?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
We didn't want to sit back here. We wanted it to be less
Go
formal.
ahead and sit back there and get comfortable.
No, we're
It
fine.
might be a long night. My name's Frank Shelton. I live 1917 Capitol in Fairbanks. I first hit Fairbanks in 1951, so I've seen a lot that happened around. I can remember when we was debating about building the oil line back in the late 60s. The negotiations was going on at that time with the oil companies. And the legislators that we elected at that time were just slobbering all over themselves. The word out then was, we gotta get an oil line at any cost. And they did. They gave the farm away to the oil companies. And the oil companies has been gaming us for 30 years. How many times we've been in court with them? You mentioned some of that. I'm one of those that don't have a lot of sympathy for the oil companies. I think that they've taken advantage of the state of Alaska, of Alaskans. They talk about all the billions of dollars that they've put into the funds for the state of Alaska. If they had been paying what they should have been paying, it would have been twice that much. Our permanent fund would have been double what it is. But that's history. Well, now they come along and they've had their way with us for 30 years, so I guess they feel now that they got a right to game us, to even actually come out and buy our legislators. Nobody seems to be upset about it. I don't hear too much being said about this. I see that one of them got sentenced today for 5 years. But my point is this. I don't feel that these oil companies need any incentives to get that oil out of the ground. Their incentives is what they're doing to us at the pumps right today. I filled my fuel tank here a little over a week ago, $2.79 a gallon. And I'm retired.
Where'd you find that cheaper gas?
Well, it's going to get higher because I see a barrel of oil today was $86 a barrel. So it's probably going to get higher. Now, what's a retiree like me supposed to do? That's just in January. That's just about going to wipe out my retirement check to fill my fuel tank. So they're doing it to us big time, and yet I hear legislators all the time, some of them Democrats. Kind of disappoints me on that group. Come out and talk about how we've got to give incentives to these oil companies, or they won't come up here and take that oil out of the ground. They'll just walk away from it.